There are people the world once worshipped for their perfect faces. But beneath the bright powder were suffocating rooms where perfume mixed with sweat, tobacco, and loneliness. Some feared germs so deeply they lived among bottles of their own waste, some slept in piles of garbage, and some believed their body odor was the most seductive thing they possessed. Hollywood called them legends. But if you turned off the lights and opened the door, you'd smell another truth raw, heavy, impossible to hide. Because this list isn't about fame. It's about the slow decay of the brightest souls ever to shine. Howard Hughes, the man who lived in bottles. Howard Hughes was once the golden boy of Hollywood aviator, producer, genius. But by the end, he had become a ghost wrapped in his own fear. After the 1946 plane crash that scarred his body, he began to fear what he couldn't see, germs. By the 1,960 seconds, Hughes locked himself inside the Desert Inn in Las Vegas. Windows sealed, curtains drawn. He spoke to assistants through notes slipped under the door. They were ordered to wash their hands dozens of times. Yet he himself went months without a bath. His hair was oily, his beard tangled, his nails curved like claws. The room reeked of sweat, medicine, and rot. Bottles of urine lined the walls because he refused to let anyone touch them. The carpet turned dark from spills. The air was thick, sweet, and sour, like milk left under the sun. A new employee could last only a few hours before running outside for air. Hughes lived on canned soup and milk through a straw wrapped in tissue. He feared sunlight, germs, even air itself. The sheets around him hardened with dirt. A doctor once said the room felt alive with bacteria. When he finally died in 1976, his body weighed barely 90 pounds. The coroner described him as unrecognizable. Hotel staff had to seal the entire floor for weeks to remove the odor. What was left behind wasn't the scent of a billionaire, but of a man who tried to escape decay until he became it. Marlon Brando, the god of decay. Marlon Brando was cinema's untouchable genius, the face of rebellion, the body of desire. Yet those who stepped into his house in Beverly Hills didn't meet a legend. They met a smell. Brando ate wherever he sat. Pizza crusts, cheese, half-finished burgers left to dry and harden into the fabric of his clothes. He rarely bathed. The air around him was a heavy mix of sweat, whiskey, and moldy food. Assistants said he only changed his shirt when the stains became too visible on camera. The couch where he slept looked more like a buffet than furniture. On the set of Apocalypse Now in 1979, he locked himself in a tent for days. No one was allowed in. The crew burned incense and used industrial fans just to clear the air. A costume designer recalled the smell as a living thing that followed him around. When Brando finally appeared, his shirt was damp, his hair slick with oil, and the scent of alcohol clung to every movement. Maria Schneider, his co-star in Last Tango in Paris, once fainted during filming because of it. Frank Sinatra refused to work with him, calling him the stink of talent. Yet Brando didn't care. He claimed bathing dulled the soul that his characters lived in the dirt. So he should too. Inside his home, the floors were sticky with spilled liquor. The carpets stained with grease. Empty cartons, bottles, and cigarette ash covered every surface. The smell of spoiled dairy lingered even when he was gone. Neighbors said they could tell when Brando was home by the air drifting from his windows. When he died in 2004, the legend remained. But so did the stories of the odor no one could forget. The man who gave cinema its rawest truth had, in the end, turned truth into decay itself. Bette Davis. the woman who lived in smoke. Bette Davis was fire on screen, sharp voice, sharper eyes. But in real life, she lived inside her own fog. From 16, she smoked without pause. By the 1,950 seconds, she was burning through more than 100 cigarettes a day, washing each drag down with whiskey. The smell never left her. It clung to her hair, her skin, her dresses. Makeup artists said her dressing room looked like a small storm, clouds of smoke, yellow curtains, and ash scattered across the vanity. Every mirror carried a thin gray film. When she walked in, the air thickened. When she left, the smoke stayed. On the set of All About Eve, filming had to stop several times because the haze became too dense for the cameras. Assistants coughed. Actors backed away. Yet Davis continued to puff calmly. Lips red. Fingers stained gold. Her voice hoarse. Unforgettable was carved from nicotine and whiskey. A wardrobe worker once said her costumes had the smell of exhaustion. At home, everything carried her scent. The pillows, the drapes, even the furniture reeked of smoke and stale perfume. Her adopted daughter later said the house felt like a giant ashtray. Davis hardly ate, living on cigarettes and liquor. The smell followed her into bed, her sheets faintly warm with the scent of burnt tobacco and old sweat. By the time her lungs began to fail, she was too weak to hold a cigarette, but still asked others to light one and place it between her fingers. When she died in 1989, the crew assigned to clean her apartment said it took weeks to clear the smell. Bette Davis didn't just inhale smoke, she became it. She burned until nothing was left but the trace of her voice and the smell of what it cost her. Laurence Olivier, the actor who refused to wash. Laurence Olivier was theater's golden son, the face of Shakespeare reborn. But behind the velvet curtain, he smelled like the stage itself, dust, sweat, and something older. At London's Old Vic in the 1,940 seconds, Olivier believed his costumes carried the soul of performance. He refused to have them washed, claiming soap stripped away the emotion. The same tunic, the same armor, worn night after night until the fabric stiffened with salt. Under the hot lights, his sweat dried, then returned. Within days, the costume felt alive, heavy with moisture and decay. Wardrobe assistants called his dressing room the closed tomb. It reeked of damp velvet, powder, and cheap cologne. To mask the smell, Olivier drenched himself in aftershave. But the mix only grew worse sweet, moldy, sharp. When he meditated before shows, doors shut tight. The air became unbearable. Technicians left the door open afterward to let the smell escape before the next actor entered. He extended the same belief to his own skin. Baths, he said, washed away a character's energy. On long runs, he wiped himself with a damp towel and went back on stage. Hotel maids at the Savoy complained of yellowed towels and sheets stiff with sweat. Even his dog refused to sleep in the same room. Vivian Leigh, his wife, once told reporters she could smell Hamlet from the hallway. Their marriage, she joked, had more odor than romance. Yet Olivier remained unshaken. He claimed audiences could sense truth through the nose as well as the eyes. Those who sat close to the stage swore they could feel it, the texture of the performance, the ghost of something human and decaying. When Olivier took his bow, applause filled the theater, but the scent lingered longer than the echo. He brought Shakespeare back to life, and in doing so, let his own body rot inside the costume. Tallulah Bankhead, the star who hated soap. Tallulah Bankhead was born to command attention, her voice, her laughter, her scandals. But what no one could ignore was the smell that arrived before she did. She hated soap, said it dried her skin and dulled her natural perfume. For weeks, she wouldn't touch water, relying instead on cheap cologne and gin to do the cleaning. She wore the same silk dress again and again, stained under the arms, shiny at the cuffs. When she entered a party, the air filled instantly smoke, alcohol, powder, and something animal. Windows opened as she walked in. On the set of Lifeboat 1944, the crew begged her to shower. The closed studio turned unbearable under the lights. Director Alfred Hitchcock reportedly joked that he could identify her scene with eyes closed. Assistants burned incense and lemon peels to keep the air breathable. Her makeup chair was nicknamed the Swamp. Coated in powder, lipstick marks, and a faint layer of gin. Her apartment in New York was no different. Clothes hung damp with sweat. Ashtrays overflowed. Glasses of gin lined every surface. The air felt thick, humid, as if soaked in alcohol. Cleaning staff quit after a single day, complaining they couldn't breathe. Even her beloved dog smelled of cigarettes and stale perfume. Tallulah refused underwear for comfort. On film sets, costume girls learned to look away when she changed her skin slick with oil, her laughter echoing through the haze. She once said, "Cleanliness is for amateurs. Real stars have a scent." By the 1960 seconds, her health was fading, but the smell remained a mix of gin, tobacco, and aging powder. When she died in 1968, her apartment had to be fumigated before anyone entered. Tallulah Bankhead lived her life like a cocktail, strong, intoxicating, impossible to forget. And when the glass finally emptied, the scent still lingered in the air. Clark Gable, the breath of a legend. Clark Gable was Hollywood's idea of perfection, the jawline, the charm, the smirk that sold 1,000 posters. But the people who kissed him on screen knew a truth the world didn't. He smelled like decay. In 1933, Gable developed a severe gum infection. Surgeons removed most of his teeth and replaced them with fixed dentures. He never took them out, not once. Food trapped inside began to rot. The smell followed him everywhere, sweet and rancid, like meat left too long in the sun. Vivien Leigh, his co-star in Gone with the Wind, once confessed that their kissing scenes were torture. Between takes, she'd step outside for air, swallowing nausea behind her smile. Loretta Young refused to work with him again after Call of the Wild, saying only he was beautiful from a distance. On set, assistants stocked mints, coffee beans, and mouth spray by the dozen. But no amount of peppermint could hide the sour mix of tobacco, bourbon, and decomposition. He brushed occasionally, but never removed the dentures to clean them. By afternoon, the smell thickened, seeping into his clothes. Makeup artists described it as a scent that stayed in the fabric. Even his trailer carried the odor warm air mixed with aftershave and something darker. Yet, on camera, he was flawless, crisp suit, neat hair, the picture of masculine grace. The illusion worked until you got close. Ironically, Gable was meticulous about everything else. He shaved twice a day, pressed his shirts, and polished his shoes until they gleamed. But his mouth, his trademark grin, was a secret he guarded with silence and mint. Crew members joked that when Gable smiled, Romance fled the room. When he died in 1960, tabloids called him the King of Hollywood. His funeral drew thousands who remembered his scent of cologne and charm. Only those who stood near him ever knew the other fragrance, the ghost that lived behind his smile. Clark Gable conquered the screen. But in private, his breath told a different story. Even legends can rot from within. Errol Flynn, the perfume of chaos. Errol Flynn was everything Hollywood wanted: handsome, reckless, dangerous. He moved through life like a sword fight, fast, wild, and dripping with charm. But to those who got too close, he didn't smell like adventure. He smelled like chaos. Flynn rarely bathed. He saw soap as a nuisance, showers as optional. His days began with rum and ended with sweat. Cigarettes burned one after another, and the air around him turned into a dense cloud of tobacco and alcohol. Assistants said his dressing room felt like the inside of a bar at closing time. The walls were yellowed, the couch sticky with spilled liquor. During the filming of Captain Blood and the Adventures of Robin Hood, costume designers had to replace his shirts every few days, the fabric darkened under the arms, soaked with sweat and gin. Crew members joked that Flynn's personal atmosphere arrived before he did. Olivia de Havilland once whispered that his scent was so thick, it could be poured into a bottle. At parties, he was impossible to ignore. The mix of body odor, rum, and cheap perfume followed him through the crowd. Women found it intoxicating at first until it lingered on their clothes the next day. Hotel staff complained his suite smelled like smoke and salt. The sheets turned yellow, the curtains reeked of whiskey and skin. By the late 1950 seconds, Flynn's health crumbled. His liver was gone, his breath thick with alcohol. He joked that he'd rather stink of rum than die of boredom. Friends said he laughed less, drank more, and lived surrounded by bottles and damp clothes. When he died in 1959 at 50, the autopsy revealed a man aged twice his years. His house in Jamaica had to be aired for days before anyone could enter. Inside, the scent was still there: rum, smoke, and the last trace of a man who mistook decay for freedom. Errol Flynn's legend smelled of danger. But in truth, it was just the perfume of a life burning too fast. Joan Crawford, the queen of sterility. Joan Crawford lived for control. Every mirror, every dress, every gesture was a weapon against chaos. While others drowned in sweat and alcohol, she fought dirt like it was death itself. Her Brentwood mansion looked more like a surgical ward than a home. White carpets, chrome fixtures, air smelling of alcohol and lemon polish. She cleaned doorknobs every hour, sometimes more. Sheets were changed nightly, curtains washed weekly. No one entered her bedroom without gloves. Visitors said the floors were so polished they reflected your face along with her judgment. The obsession was born from poverty. Raised in filth, Crawford turned cleanliness into religion. She kept written schedules for her maids: wipe mirrors, sanitize handles, replace towels. If she found a speck of dust, someone was fired. Even her adopted daughters learned to scrub the bathroom at midnight if she spotted lint on the tiles. On film sets, she carried the same rules. Her chair was wiped with alcohol before every scene. Costumers used cotton gloves to hand her clothes. She sprayed perfume only after disinfecting the bottle. The scent of antiseptic followed her everywhere: sharp, sterile, metallic. Makeup artists said her dressing room smelled like a hospital blended with Chanel. No. 5. At home, she tamed even the air. Windows stayed shut to keep dust out. She slept beneath sheets ironed to military precision. Her children recalled the smell of bleach in their dreams. One maid said she never saw Joan sit down without first wiping the seat. When she died in 1977, her apartment in New York looked untouched, pristine, sealed, frozen. Not a wrinkle in the bed, not a hair out of place. The scent of disinfectant lingered long after she was gone. Joan Crawford fought decay so fiercely, she became sterile herself, untouched, immaculate, and utterly alone. Fred Astaire, the man who smelled like fat. Fred Astaire was the definition of grace, light feet, perfect rhythm, the smile of a gentleman carved in light. But the secret behind his shine was far less elegant. His hair, that slick golden helmet, was grease not with oil or pomade, but with animal fat. Astaire was obsessive about his image. He believed his hair must never move, not even as he spun or leapt across the floor. In the 1,930 seconds, before modern gels existed, he used a homemade mixture of beef tallow and beeswax. He melted it every morning, combed it in while still warm. The smell burnt, greasy, sweet filled his dressing room. Under the hot lights of MGM, it began to cook. Crew members said you could smell him before you saw him. The odor of fried meat and talcum powder hung in the air long after he left. His dance partner, Ginger Rogers, once joked that performing with him was like waltzing through a kitchen. Stagehands had to wash the floor after every routine because the wax melted, leaving greasy prints behind. Astaire rarely washed his hair during production. He feared water would ruin the texture. Instead, he wiped it with a towel and added more fat the next day. Within a week, his scalp was coated in residue, his comb sticky, his pillows darkened with oil. Assistants cleaned his brushes with boiling water and alcohol to dissolve the buildup. Still, the smell clung to everything: hats, collars, even his shoes. Despite it all, Astaire remained immaculate on camera. His movements so fluid that audiences never suspected the scent behind the perfection. He embodied refinement but lived in a cloud of rendered grease. When he died in 1987, archivists restoring his costumes noted a faint odor, something between dust and old cooking oil. Even time hadn't erased it. Fred Astaire danced like a dream. But dreams have a smell too, and his was unmistakably human. Steve McQueen, the mechanic's scent. Steve McQueen was Hollywood's rebel prince, the king of cool, who made speed look holy. But his cool had a smell: metal, fuel, and sweat baked under California sun. He hated showers. Said they slowed him down. Each morning, he rode his motorcycle until his shirt was soaked, then wiped himself with a rag and sprayed Old Spice. His skin stayed slick. His hair clumped with oil and dust. When he leaned in to talk, you could smell gasoline on his breath and leather on his hands. On the set of Bullet 1968, the crew had to air out his car between takes. The seats absorbed his sin engine grease, cigarette smoke, and old sweat. The stunt coordinator called it the smell of horsepower. McQueen kept his leather jacket for years without washing it. The lining turned dark and stiff. When he moved, the air shifted with the odor of burnt rubber and whiskey. At home in Malibu, he lived among engines. His garage was his bedroom. He slept beside his bikes. The walls streaked with oil. The floor littered with rags and empty beer cans. The smell never left his skin. Housekeepers quit after a week, saying the air felt thick with exhaust. McQueen believed in living dirty. Clean men don't race. He told a friend, "They don't bleed. They don't win. That defiance became legend, even as it corroded his body. The cigarettes, the fumes, the sleepless nights all mixed into the scent that followed him everywhere. When cancer finally claimed him in 1980, doctors said his lungs were black with asbestos and tar. His son remembered the smell of his father's hands, metallic, burnt, alive. Steve McQueen died as he lived, fast, defiant, and covered in the sin of motion. Robert Mitchum, the smoker of silence. Robert Mitchum didn't need to talk much. His voice carried the weight of smoke. Every word he spoke sounded like it had been lit, inhaled, and exhaled slowly. He lived inside that haze, cool, detached, and reeking of tobacco. He smoked through every moment of his life. Morning coffee, film rehearsals, dinner, even sleep. The cigarette stayed between his fingers like a signature. By the 1,950 seconds, his skin had taken its tone from nicotine sallow, warm, and faintly dusty. Crew members said he smelled like a burnt room after a party. When filming Out of the Past and The Night of the Hunter, the smoke around him grew so dense that cameras blurred. Lighting technicians had to adjust exposure to pierce the fog. The smell of tobacco stuck to the walls, to the costumes, to every microphone he used. He never changed shirts between takes. The fabric was stiff with ash. His trailer was described as a portable chimney. At home, things were no better. He slept in the same sheets for weeks. The pillow yellowed where his head rested. The air was thick with old smoke and the faint sweetness of marijuana. Friends who visited said they left wearing him. The curtains, brown from nicotine, crumbled when touched. Mitchum didn't care. He said bathing too often washed away the character. Instead, he splashed cologne over his shirt and lit another cigarette. His wife begged him to quit, but he only smiled. When the smoke stops, I stop. By the 1,970 seconds, his lungs rasped like sandpaper. Yet he kept acting, his presence larger than the body that carried it. When he died in 1997, his house still smelled of him: smoke, silence, and something hauntingly human. Robert Mitchum never raised his voice. He didn't need to. The air around him told every story. Elizabeth Taylor, the woman who died in perfume. Elizabeth Taylor was beauty distilled into myth-violet eyes, diamonds, silk, but her real obsession wasn't jewels. It was scent. She didn't believe in water. She believed in perfume. Each morning began with ritual. Assistants lined up bottles across her vanity Chanel, Bal à Versailles, and her own white diamonds. She sprayed them not just on her wrists or neck, but on her hair, her clothes, her sheets, even her pillows. Her room shimmered with fragrance so dense that visitors said it felt like breathing liquid sugar. Taylor claimed soap stripped away the body's natural power. Instead, she layered scent to mask fatigue, pain, or loneliness. The combination of powder, lotion, and oil turned her skin into a permanent film of sweetness. Under the heat of studio lights, the perfume thickened, melting into her makeup. Crew members described the smell as beautiful at first, suffocating after minutes. During Cleopatra 1963, assistants used fans between takes just to circulate air around her dressing room. Costumes hung heavy with perfume and body oil, too saturated to wash. Her co-stars joked that her scent arrived 5 minutes before she did. At home, she lived the same way. Wardrobes full of gowns sealed in scented sachets. Bedrooms reeking of musk and jasmine. Her maids wore gloves because the oil stained their hands. She said she wanted every inch of her life to smell like love. In her final years, the air around her remained intoxicating. Hospitals requested extra ventilation when she was admitted. Her perfumes overpowered the antiseptic. When she died in 2011, the scent lingered over the sheets, the air, even the nurses who cared for her. Elizabeth Taylor didn't just wear perfume, she lived inside it. And when she was gone, the fragrance stayed, the last luxury that refused to fade. Orson Welles, the genius who stank of garlic. Orson Welles was a giant of cinema, of appetite, of ego. His voice could fill a room, so could his smell. He devoured everything: food, drink, attention, and his body carried the proof. By the 1,950 seconds, Welles lived like a fallen emperor. He ate entire meals alone at midnight, steaks dripping with fat, garlic mashed into butter, red wine poured until the tablecloth turned purple. He drank instead of slept, smoked instead of breathed. Assistants said his hands were always slick with oil and wine stains. His clothes, once tailored silk, became dark with sweat and grease. On the set of Touch of Evil, 1958, microphones had to be moved farther away because his breath overpowered the sound equipment. The mix of wine, tobacco, and raw garlic was unmistakable: sweet, sour, human. Technicians lit candles during takes to cut through the stench. His dressing room smelled of spoiled meat and cologne, a combination that seemed to follow him everywhere. At home in Los Angeles, his mansion resembled a cellar. Curtains closed, windows sealed, air thick with cigar smoke and the must of unwashed fabric. Plates of half-eaten food and wine bottles cluttered the floor. Guests described it as a restaurant that never closed, but forgot to clean. He refused to shower, preferring to wipe himself with towels dipped in cheap cologne. The result was worse: perfume over decay. Even his writing smelled. Pages of his scripts were dotted with wine rings and greasy fingerprints. When he dictated, the stenographer sat a few feet back to breathe. Yet, through the chaos, brilliance poured out sentences as heavy and intoxicating as the man himself. When Orson Welles died in 1985, his housekeepers opened the windows for the first time in years. The air that escaped was heavy garlic, cigar smoke, and loneliness. It took days before the rooms felt empty again. He changed cinema forever. But his final act was simpler. He became the echo of his own indulgence. The genius was gone, but his scent strong, defiant, unforgettable, refused to leave. Hollywood can polish every surface, but it can't erase the scent of being human. Behind the cameras, perfection sweats, rots, and breathes like everyone else. Tell me which name shocked you the most. Like, comment, and subscribe to uncover the next secret this city tries so hard to perfume.